Bom dia a todos, meu nome é Antônio Mauro Saraiva, eu presido a Comissão de Pesquisa do Instituto de Estudos Avançados e é um prazer estar aqui nesse segundo seminário. Não? Os demais ouvem? Então eu falo um pouquinho mais alto e ele aumenta lá também. Então, segundo... Não quer sentar aqui, professora? Não? Troca a cadeira, se essa posição do ouvido não ajuda. Não? Vamos lá. Então, nós temos aqui o professor Donald Peterson, que é professor visitante do IA. Como é a segunda ocasião, eu vou repetir um pouquinho do currículo dele, para quem não teve presente a primeira vez. Ele é formado pelo Imperial College, em Londres, um mestrado, um doutorado pelo University College, de Londres também, e tem um Master of Arts pela Universidade de Edimburgo, e trabalhou, evidentemente, no Reino Unido, evidentemente, mas também na Alemanha, na China, onde esteve até recentemente, agora está aqui no Brasil conosco por um período de 1 ano. Ele trabalhou em alguns centros como o European Computer Industry Research Center, em Munique, no London Knowledge Lab, da London University, e agora está aqui no IA. Suas áreas de atuação incluem lógica, filosofia, psicologia e ciência da computação. E o foco do seu trabalho aqui no IA, a proposta dele é justamente essa do slide, Life in the Cognitive Era. E com base nisso ele está desenvolvendo uma série de atividades que incluem esses seminários, mas também tem atividades outras paralelas. Depois vocês podem se inteirar mais, inclusive interagindo com ele diretamente. Ele tem um grupo de estudos agora com os alunos que ele chamou de TikTok Group. O primeiro, eu vou aproveitar para quem não teve acesso ao texto que divulga este evento aqui. A primeira premissa da série de seminários é que novas tecnologias como inteligência de máquina, computação ubíqua, robótica e comunicação têm implicações profundas em categorias primárias da vida, como educação, trabalho, saúde e bem-estar. A segunda premissa é que todas essas tecnologias são ditrópicas e devem ser dirigidas para otimizar os seus efeitos, para o que nós precisamos pensar 10 ou 20 anos à frente. No primeiro seminário, ele introduziu essas questões e usou ideias da filosofia, psicologia e lógica para ajudar a entender a natureza da mente que enfrenta essas novas e cambiantes condições. E ele começou a examinar o sistema IBM Watson como um exemplo. Nesse segundo seminário, ele vai abordar implicações para o trabalho, para a educação e outras áreas da vida, com foco na agilidade dos negócios e outras cyber sense como um tópico em educação. E ele vai examinar com mais detalhe o IBM Watson System. Então é isso. Don, thank you again for being here, and so the floor is yours. Thank you. Normalmente ele fala por um certo tempo, mas ele está sempre aberto para interrupções e questões, se vocês quiserem. E depois nós temos tempo para perguntas. Para as pessoas que estiverem assistindo pela internet, há um e-mail, que eu não lembro agora qual é, iaresponde@usp.br. Então, quem quiser mandar perguntas, pode mandar, que tem alguém lá coletando essas perguntas e pode depois imprimir, trazer aqui para o Dom para responder. iaresponde@usp.br. Ok? Obrigado. George. Thank you.
Obrigado, Antonio. E obrigado, você. I will speak in English because I think your English is better than my Portuguese. This is the seminar number 2 for the series Life in the Cognitive Era. Now, by the cognitive era, I mean the era of artificial intelligence, robotics, fast communications, and ubiquitous computing. So today, I will speak about cyberology as a subject, and futurism as an orientation. And I'll speak about cyber stoicism. Now that's the application of the ideas of the ancient Greeks, particularly Epictetus and Aristotle, to contemporary conditions. So first on the word cyberology, the current era has many names. One is the cognitive era, another is the cyborg era, another is the fourth industrial revolution, a term used by Staub, and another one is the second mechanical revolution, and another one is the second digital revolution. So there are many names for the same thing, but that thing, I think, is evident to everybody. It involves technologies such as these ones. I don't need to tell you that interfaces have changed and are changing. They already involve movement and sound. We can speak to a computer, which some years ago we could only do in a very restricted way. We have facial recognition, we have speech recognition, we have surveillance technologies, which are worrying everybody. We have wearable computing. Now, at the moment, you do not usually find computers in your clothes, but this will come quite soon and is possible already. We have intelligent agents. Now, these, again, are not quite on the market yet, but the technology exists in the research labs. Microsoft, for example, have spent billions of dollars developing intelligent agents, but their reasoning is that they can make more money if they make us wait for a while, and then they will release them. But the function of an intelligent agent, like all new technologies, is ditropic, as I call it, meaning that it can have good effects, and it can have bad effects, and it can have both, and it can have both at the same time. Now, with an intelligent agent, the good effect is to function like a butler, like somebody who looks after you, who gets to know you, who gets to know a lot of information about you, and your present locational context, where you are, what sort of restaurants you like. I mean, this is a trivial example, but your butler, your intelligent agent, will know that you like Italian food, for example. It will know that you are presently in Dubai at a certain location. In fact, it will know exactly where you are. And it can tell you very quickly what the relevant Italian restaurants are, how to get to them, and so on and so forth. But more particularly, if you are a vegan, then choice of restaurants is not altogether easy, and it can help you to do that. But more in the world of letters than the world of food, it will know what sort of thing you like to read, and it will compile a personal newspaper for you and deliver this to you first thing in the morning. These things are all technically possible. It just so happens that commercial interests have not brought them onto the market yet. Okay, but an application in education, obviously enough, for intelligent agents is that they will be available to help our children with their schoolwork. And there we get into a gray area because, of course, they will cost money, and the more money we pay, the better an agent we will get, and the more advantage will be provided to our kids, which is very nice for them, but it points, of course, to a social differentiation. You get what you pay for. And we expect a further difficulty with intelligent agents, and that is that they can be biased. If anybody has influence over what the agent finds for us, then of course they can bias the result. And we will not have the time, we will not have the energy to check up on whether we agree with the bias wired into the agent. Now, as everybody knows, this is already the case with Google. Google may be more or less secretive, but what's not a secret is that you can pay to have your entry rise up in the results table. Yeah? You type the word XYZ, and if you paid enough money, XYZ will rise up. And in practical terms, very few people have the time to look far down in the list which Google provides. And so we are already being presented with biased information. And by this, I do not mean to sound paranoid. This is just a technical fact that if a machine stands between reality and us, then the machine can be biased by whoever owns it or whoever controls it. And that bias, of course, can be a good thing. In school teaching and a project I was involved in London called iClass, the intention was to let the teacher bias the delivery to students in response to their learning pattern, their learning style, and their current knowledge of the subject. So again, I use the word ditropic. This is not inherently evil. It's not inherently good, but it is a possibility provided by the technology for bias one way or the other. Now, I introduced this word cyberology with some reservation. I don't really like new words, but also I don't like vagueness. And I think some of the words for current conditions are not really satisfactory. Cognitive is a problematic word, as João Kogler says in his blog. Maybe some of you know João Kogler? No? Okay, well, I'll bring his blog to your attention next time. But the word cognitive comes out of psychology, obviously. And fourth industrial revolution, I'm not really happy with any of these words. So cyberology, I think, has been very occasionally used. It's from the Greek, of course, cyber meaning steersman, and ology meaning essence or word. So for want of a better word, I call it this, or life in the cognitive era, if you like. Now, futurism, for example, was propounded by the Italian futurists 100 years ago. Now, in fact, they were friends of war and destruction and so on, so that connotation is not intended here. The point is that we need to think 10 or 20 years into the future, and we need to do it now, because the future is coming very fast, and these things will be upon us. So a common phrase, of course, is the robots are coming. We've all heard this. The robots, in fact, are coming, and the worry there is not the total work that they will do. I mean, of course, if robots would do 20% of our work, then we could have a 4-day week and a 3-day weekend and let them do the work. But that would be the even-handed case, which we do not really expect. No, it's okay. Obrigado. What we expect will happen is a biased advantage to certain sectors of society and a biased disadvantage to others. So, for example, if your job is picking potatoes out of the ground, it could be that a robot will come and do it better and faster than we can. Also, secretarial work may be replaced by robots of one sort or another. The worry is that rather suddenly and rather unevenly, robots will take over parts of the work that humanity does. So I'll come back to this subject later today, but obviously we need to act now to provide education, which I call meta-robotic. Now, by meta-robotic, I mean simply that it concerns the things that we can do with robots. Design them, control them, install them, train them, train people to work with them, and so on and so forth. There are many new professions that may arise because of the incursion of robots into our lives. But the thing which, personally speaking, I do not find very useful is just to sit and complain about it. I mean, big industry is not going to listen to me. It's not going to listen to most people. It's simply going to do what it finds best. And what we have to do is predict it 10 or 20 years in advance and do something about it. Now, the Luddites, I'll come to them, but this gentleman wants to speak.
Thank you very much. I had a question with respect to this story of the robots are coming, going to take our jobs, and well, it sounds very much the same as people said with the steam machine from was started working when the computers came. I think it's like all Greek philosophers said, there is nothing new under the sun. So, in which respect this example of the past can help us in the future?
Thank you for your point. I put here a picture of the Luddites, who are very well known. The Luddites were people who worked in woolen mills in England, and they heard that the machines are coming, maybe not robots, and they started to try to destroy the machines. Now, of course, they did not win the war. The machines won. And so what it has meant is that the type of work available to humans has changed. So we can't really kill the robots. I don't think so. Even legal measures will not kill the robots. And so the issue is what jobs we can do which are relevant to a world with robots in it. Now, this is already happening in the car industry, of course. Our cars are made by robots. In the food industry, there has been a lot of mechanization. Now, as Antonio Saraiva said in the first seminar, there has been use of tools since very early days. And robots are sophisticated tools, but the use of tools is not new. And we've had mechanical tools, then we had electrical tools, electronic tools, and now so-called cognitive tools with artificial intelligence, etc. So it's true that there is nothing new under the sun, as this gentleman said. So perhaps it's a bit too extreme to say, as some people do, that we have a paradigm shift, we have a total revolution. Actually, we have a gradual progression. Really, I think that's the more reasonable thing to say, and I hope that's consistent with what the gentleman here says. You want to speak? Okay.
I like to disagree. I think it will be completely different from everything else we have ever seen in the history of humanity. Because now we'll have robots, but not physical robots. The thing that are not the physical robots, is the software. You have software that will be intelligent. that will be creative, that will replace lawyers, physicians, and poets, and musicians, and everything, and sex workers, everything. And I think the humankind needs to get prepared for that. So we find things for us to do that are the things that we like to do, and we must have a strict regulation how these things happen. Otherwise, we'll be useless. But I think this is not for in 5 years or 10 years, but it's within 20, 30 years. I think this will be I think this will be a radical change.
Just a quick note, since Don mentioned something that I said last on the first seminar. Yeah, I agree with you that it's going to be a really big change. But just want to remind us that this kind of big changes have already happened before, like when agriculture started, when the first tools started, and then when machines came, when electricity came, we also had a huge change. So it's another huge change that mankind is facing. We could not anticipate none of those changes before. So it's another big change, another changing paradigm, another one. And we don't know which will be the next one in maybe 100 years.
Okay, so as a surprise, I want to say I agree with everybody. Right? I do, seriously. I think it's true that there's nothing new under the sun, and we need to remember that in case we can learn from history. But it's also true that day is not the same thing as night, and day fades gradually into night. Yeah? One moment it's bright sunshine, then it's a bit dull, then dull, then it is nighttime, or in the morning it's dark, and then slowly it becomes light. So in the language we speak in binary oppositions. That's the nature of the way we talk and think. But of course, we're not entirely serious. Binary oppositions have gray in the middle. That's how it is, as with day and night. And so personally, I don't think there's a lot to argue about with this. Change is happening, change is coming. If one potato picker loses their job, that's a serious matter. If 1 million lose their jobs, that's a more serious matter. And of course, I'm thinking of Brazil, insofar as I understand Brazil as an outsider. But I'm also thinking of China, where I lived for a long time. There they have a huge cloud in the sky, because many jobs there can be replaced by robotics. They've just opened a new AI park northeast of Beijing, I think, and of course robotics will be part of this. I've been many times to Shenzhen, which is across the water from Hong Kong Island, and seen many factories for electronics with human beings doing jobs which could easily be mechanized. Now, at the moment, they've not done it yet, but this is a country with no welfare system. Mechanization, robotics, etc., are a real possibility there and could lose the jobs of many, many people, which nobody wants to happen, but the government could push in that direction if it wants to. Here in Brazil, there is the development in robotics in Belo Horizonte, for example, and we'll see what that does. But the impact on human labor is really quite obvious. The implications, I think, for education are really obvious. Now, when people are being negative, they say that education always lags behind reality. Now, there are people here who know much more about Brazilian education than I do, and I hope they will speak. But this is a circumstance for perhaps every country in the world where we know roughly what is going to happen. The future is now, as the saying goes, and we need perhaps new curriculum and perhaps new teaching methods in order to catch up with reality that is already here. I mean, how crazy does it get? And if I can speak with more background knowledge about my own country, the curriculum in school for computers and computing subjects is quite seriously out of date. And two friends of mine there, Achim Jung and Simon Peyton-Jones, at Birmingham and UCL universities, are trying to reform it. And, we hope they have success. But the situation is a little bit comical. I mean, if we imagine that we are people from Mars looking down on Earth, maybe this would be one of the things that would surprise us. I mean, why does the school education system allow itself to become out of date? Now, having asked that provocative question, I think we also need to be sympathetic, because school teachers need to have knowledge of what they're teaching. And we cannot expect people suddenly to become expert in something new. So gradual methods are perhaps the most realistic. But I think the sort of thing we're talking about today is what we could call a clear and present danger, to use an American phrase. It's clear because we know roughly what is going to happen. And it's present because it's already happening. I made a little chart there. This is not intended to be complete or anything like that. But it is just some thoughts at the beginning. I've introduced the word meta-robotics because I think we need a word for this. As in the novel 1984, if we don't have the words to say what we think and what we mean, we're seriously disempowered. And so you'll see a few new words that I introduced. This is not because I like making up words, okay? But in medicine, for example, when they need to, they introduce new words. And they do it very systematically. I think they set a very good example. They do it from the Greek and the Latin into English, and the same can be done for other languages. But in medicine, they know that if they don't have a word for something, like a new virus or an effect of a virus or whatever, then they're disempowered. And I'll put these slides all on the website for this seminar series, so you can get them and do whatever you like with them. But anyway, what I put in this chart under meta-robotics is supposed to be an indication of the things that people can do, humans can do, in a world full of robots. Yeah? So this is an issue of synergy. It's an issue of working with robots rather than working against them. Now, we may need legislation in law to inhibit certain bad uses of robots. Of course, that is the case with anything, but I don't think it's essentially a legal issue of denial. I don't think it's just a matter of forbidding certain things in order to preserve human jobs. I think it is very much a positive, constructive issue of what we can do to prepare our children who are, let's say, 1 year old now for the circumstances when they're 20 years old, and to prepare ourselves for circumstances later in our lives. Robots will change the world. Other such technologies will change the world, and it's already happening. So this is intended in a constructive spirit under education. I put training, new skills, reskilling. Just a moment, please. Now, one thing we see already in university provision is short courses. Now, short courses perhaps in the past had a low status. They were for people's amusement or their retirement, etc. But the circumstance now is it's less easy than it was in the past to train in something, start work at the age of 21, keep going for 45 years, retire and die. Right? That's the old pattern, and of course it's a comfortable pattern, and of course it will continue. But we need reskilling perhaps more than we did in the past for the simple reason that we have fast change. Now, the community who I find most aware of volatility, as they call it, is the business community. Now, an advantage that they have, so to speak, is that in business, if you're not hooked into reality, you go bankrupt and you disappear. Right? So for this reason, I think the business community is especially aware of the issue of volatility or fast change in life, the world, work, and also the issue of agility in response to volatility. Now, by agility, they simply mean that we need to be able to respond to current context and current circumstances quickly and decisively and wisely. Yeah? So I'll come to the ancient Greeks a bit later, but they spoke about practical wisdom in the case of Aristotle, and the Stoics spoke about balanced judgment, by which they actually meant something quite similar, though they came after Aristotle. But these issues are not new. And we have something which is new but not new, if I can say like that. But back to the subject of work, inevitably there will be a redefinition of some working roles. And this may be a good thing, and it may also be a bad thing, but we should not expect that in 20 years' time, 30 years' time, or more, that the profile of human employment types will be the same. Now, clearly, in an ideal world, this provides an opportunity to improve well-being, or bem-estar, as you say in Portuguese, or eudaimonia, as the Greeks said. The issue is not new. And in principle, these developments in technology should provide the possibility to improve our quality of life through synergistic and well-judged interaction with these new technologies. Now, whether we can achieve this ideal, we don't know yet. But I think we have a clear and present opportunity, as well as a clear and present danger, to do something about it. Now, obviously, we are university people, we're in education, and there certainly are activities here on the campus of USP addressing issues of new technologies. I won't try to give a list now, but many people are concerned with this. The existence of undergraduate courses on the topic we're discussing today is perhaps another matter. I was, in the last few days, at the conference of EBIC, which is the Encontro Brasileiro Internacional de Ciências Cognitivas in Campinas, and I'm very glad to say that they took this sort of topic as their conference theme. Now, they called it the ethics of big data, so that's philosophy orienting to these issues, and that's philosophy in quite a broad sense. But I think it was a very interesting conference, and you just type EBIC XII for 12 into Google, and you'll see what they were talking about. I mean, they have an orientation to certain philosophical approaches, and you may have your own alternative approaches, but the principle of applying existing humanities disciplines to the new technology of today and tomorrow is something we have in common. Any thoughts now? Well, if it's okay, then I'll switch topic to what I call cyber sense. Now, if you can find an English or Portuguese word for cyber sense, then please say. I'm not aware that there is one. But anyway, we have behind us Aristotle and the Stoics, who expressed views about wise conduct of life. Now, they sometimes call this ethics, but it's not really about being good or bad or wicked or whatever. It's mainly about our practical conduct of our lives. Now, Aristotle, in the book The Nicomachean Ethics, book 6, especially section 5, talks about phronesis. Now, the references are in the slides, and I'll put the slides for everybody on the website. Aristotle thought that there was a distinction between Sophia and phronesis. Now, by Sophia, he meant intellectual wisdom, intellectual judgment, reasoning, clarity of thought, etc. And of course, everybody agrees that this is important. In fact, without it, we've got a real problem. But Aristotle thought that in addition, there was such a thing as mature, balanced judgment. And he thought that this comes with experience, and it's difficult to acquire it when you're young, simply because the younger person has less experience. Now, Aristotle's idea about phronesis is actually no surprise at all. It's well known in many professions that a person can go and study as a student, but they only really become good at their job with experience. Now, to take a military example, this is well known in soldiering. A person can train and become very fit and become a very well-trained robot, so to speak, when they're young. But it's only after years of experience in the field, as they say, that they become a good soldier. Now, the same is true of classical musicians. It's well known that a student may do very well at music school, but when they go out into the world of playing in orchestras, in my country at least, they can't really be trusted, in fact, that's what people say, until they have experience. they're liable to do something silly on the stage, something conspicuous. If a fellow musician makes a mistake, they fail to cover up for them. That's what you're supposed to do. You hide any mistakes made by your colleagues. Instead, they're likely to go, oh, what a terrible shock you gave me, and this sort of thing. Well, I won't talk about myself here, but it's a real nuisance when people do that. And the list goes on. Now, let me just have... So my suggestion, obviously enough, is that in the cyber age, we need cyber phronesis, we need cyber stoicism. Now, turning again to the Stoics, in addition to Aristotle, they said things, and Epictetus said things, which are really rather obvious, but they are more typical of a mature personality than a very young personality. Now, the Stoics, I put the picture of the little sweets there because one example which Epictetus gives is that you should be able to go to a party and along comes some very nice sweets and you say, not today, thank you, even though you want one, right? And he's not really trying to be negative, actually. He's not saying it's clever to starve yourself. The point is that we need to deliberately decide which sweets we're going to eat and when. Now, if I'm successful in communicating this, I hope I'm making it completely obvious, because I'm not trying to say anything obscure at all. When we pick up our mobile devices, sometimes there's very good reason to do so. Especially in some professions, people get messages which they have to respond to. And it's not necessarily a mistake to do so. But we do need to be deciding deliberately when and where to access the internet. Now, to state the obvious, accessing cyberspace at random, almost 24 hours a day, or during all waking hours, has become very common. Now, if you ask somebody why they're doing it, maybe they have a good reason. I mean, of course they may. But maybe they're just wasting their time. And maybe they're fragmenting their attention. Now, our brain is not designed to cope with infinite changes of input, to do infinite multitasking. We're designed to do some multitasking. Now, this is not a seminar on brain physiology, so I just say it very briefly, but the area here at the top and the front of the brain is called the prefrontal cortex, and it is particularly devoted to control of attention, control of action. And of course, in the brain, everything is connected, so other parts of the brain are involved, and this is not the only thing that this part does. But if you want a simple picture, this part of our brain is under increased pressure in modern times. And I mention this because I think it's an important aspect of cyberology, as I've called it, or whatever you want to call it, namely that the profile of pressures on us has changed and it will change. Now, this is a cognitive point. The point about robotics I made before was mainly a manual labor point, though, as somebody said, of course, there are software robots to consider also. Now, here we make a cognitive point that the demands of the world on us are changing in profile. Not black and white, not totally sudden, perhaps. But for example, when the pocket calculator came in, the demand on mental arithmetic went down. So that was less work for us, more work for the machine. Computers can learn the telephone book this big. They can remember everything easily. The demands on our memory have perhaps gone down. But the demand on attention switching or multitasking has in effect gone up. And so, of course, we can speak about the bad, nasty machines and how terrible they make our lives, but then we have to ask the question, maybe we are responsible because we let them have this effect on us. So I think it's worth looking at Epictetus, I think it's worth looking at Aristotle to see what they said before these machines ever existed. Yeah? Yep.
Good morning. I have a question about that. I'm concerned about the citizenship of these machines because I've heard some 3 years ago in Saudi Arabia, a robot got a citizenship. So we are talking about education and tools and cyber tools, but I'm concerned when, for instance, if I have a robot in my classroom, how can I deal with this artificial intelligence? And how can I teach to a robot? And how this robot will answer for my abilities to teach? I don't know whether you are considered the artificial intelligence only as a tool or as someone like us can I imagine as a futurist that I will have some machines and robots in the classrooms or something like that. Someone like me to teach and to interact in educational system or not? Will it be possible to imagine something like that?
Would you forgive me if I give a very boring answer? Yeah. My boring answer is it's not really happened yet. Let's wait and see. Now, this answer was given to me in a seminar headed by Glauco Arbix in another department. And I asked a question about big data analytics, and the other person said, well, what you're suggesting hasn't actually happened yet, so let's wait and see. Now, I think it's a very good thing to try to imagine, and we can try to imagine machine intelligence which could sit in the classroom and learn. But forgive me for just being very practical and short-sighted about this, but we don't really know. It's not happened yet. We know certain things that machines can learn, of course. They can store data and so on. But the normal activity in a classroom is interactive. It's essentially interactive. It's different from reading a book. The teacher and the pupil interact. And robots are just starting to be able to respond to context. So when we see them become more context reactive, I think then we can start to be concerned whether the teaching methods human to human can be applied human to robot or robot to human. But a really useful aspect of that question is it stimulates us to answer the question, what is so special about human beings? What's so special about a school teacher? I mean, we know that children need school teachers, and not only books. But there is a question, why? What is it that we're doing? So here are three concepts I've introduced today. The word cyberology, somebody else has used it. It's somewhere on the internet. It's a fairly obvious word to use, but we need some word for life in the cognitive era. Futurism, I've introduced that word. Again, it's an old word. It has unfortunate connotations with fascism, violence and war in the hands of the Italian futurists of 100 years ago. But I like their paintings, so I use their paintings. But just to emphasize, I'm not trying to support the rest of what they said. Now, cyber stoicism, I put some references there. You can see particularly references to Epictetus and references to Aristotle in the Nicomachean Ethics. But my suggestion is that they were talking about wisdom in human conduct of a sort that we need today as much as we needed in ancient Greece. The context has changed, but we can't simply blame machines for everything that is happening now. We're not obliged to use them in the way we do. So let me move on to education now. So that's coming full circle back to that slide. I think it's an open question. I don't pretend to know all the answers yet. Maybe nobody knows all the answers, but there is, so to speak, a gap in the primary school curriculum. Now, do you have in Brazil the sweet called a polo? No? Okay, a polo is a white sweet. It looks like the wheel of a car. In other words, there's a hole in the middle. No? It's a sweet with a hole in the middle. And I think there's a hole in the middle in primary education. Let's blame my country. Okay, the UK has got a hole in the middle. And there's also a hole in the middle of the dictionary, because change has happened so fast that education has not caught up, and also our vocabulary has not caught up. So we're left without words, and we're left without curriculum. But I mean this in the positive sense, that we should be able to identify the curriculum items we think are necessary, and we should be able to identify words which we think are necessary. Of course, it will be a very bad thing if we do the job badly, because we will look silly, and it will look as if we're wasting children's time and wasting ink in the dictionary. So we need to choose good words, and we need to think of good curriculum. But quite what to put in the curriculum, I don't pretend to know. The measured, well-judged use of handheld devices, for example, is obviously a good thing. And it's a good thing to be able to say, this is why I'm doing it, this is why I'm not doing it. I think there are some professions where people just need to do it all the time. They need to multitask. There's some jobs in which it's really quite difficult to spend a whole hour without doing it because people are expecting answers. So, of course, it's not a simple issue. But you'll be aware of the work of Max Weber, the German sociologist. Yeah? Well, he introduced the concept of Entzaubung, which means disenchantment. And he felt that the modern age at his time had introduced a disenchantment, or a removal of the magic of life. And he hoped for a Wiederzauberung, which means a re-enchantment in German. Now, I think we're looking at the same thing here. The overuse of new technologies, even the existence of 100 television channels, so you can bounce around all the time, is introducing a certain shallowness, a certain superficiality in our relationship with the world, our relationship with knowledge, and our relationship with each other, which we can call a topic of philosophy, we can call it a topic of sociology, we can call it many things. I think in principle many disciplines are relevant here, but even the use of Google can produce superficiality, though of course it is a ditropic technology. Google is very, very useful, and it's useful to school kids when they're writing essays. But it also creates the possibility of copy and paste without understanding. Now, school teachers know this. Nobody really knows quite what to do about it. But with the increased speed of picking up information also comes the possibility of writing essays without really writing an essay, or something in between. Any thoughts?
I don't. Since you have just came up with the idea, the point of superficiality, do you have any idea or suggestion of how could we tackle this problem of superficiality, maybe with education or even with design initiatives?
This is João Kogler, and I mentioned João's blog earlier on, where he provides a critique of the word cognitive. So I think we should get João's blogs addressed to everybody. Regarding superficiality, I don't really have answers. I think the usual point that's made is that experience and action count. If we only talk about things, we stand in danger of being superficial, but if we actually do things, then less so. Now, that's not a remotely original thought. Aristotle makes that point about learning. He says, for example, we learn to play the lyre by playing the lyre. Now, the lyre is some stringed instrument. We might say, closer to home, we learn to ride a bicycle by riding a bicycle. And of course, at first, we ride it badly and we fall off. But we learn by doing. That's all I can offer at the moment. Do you have thoughts, João?
Yeah, I was thinking related to that gap pointed by Herbert Simon from very long time, since the first edition of his book, The Science of the Artificial, and he made 3 revisions separated by almost 10 years each other, and in each revision he put more emphasis in the fact that there is a big gap between design and actual human needs in the sense of ergonomy and behavior. So maybe the superficiality is something that we appreciate in these heroic times that will not last for long until the point that we are able to understand better how to create or put requisites in the project step in order to design tools better adapted to human needs. Like the use of human robots has its sense in interactive aspects. Just this, or for experimental uses, but not relate to the replacement of a human character. I see. Well, this is how I see that. Maybe it could be changed by design once we are aware of how to do this and have the desire of doing this also. I don't know, what do you think?
It's a very interesting point you make, and a much more serious point than is sometimes made about these Japanese humanoid robots. I mean, of course they're a surprise and they look a bit like a person, and we can dress them up and all this sort of thing. But if I understand your point rightly, the serious thing is that they can be designed with cognition in mind, with our cognitive profile in mind. And there, regarding Herbert Simon, I'm reminded of his book Models of Man as well, which, of course, it should be called Models of Humans, but he introduced the idea of bounded rationality. And by that, he basically means that we have the cognitive profile we have, and this has limitations. And he was a computer scientist, among other things. I think this will be where he got the idea. Our computer systems are always bounded. They always have a limited profile of capabilities in processing power, memory, speed, etc. So if a robot is going to help us, then it's a bit like a jigsaw. Its profile needs to fit in a helpful way with our profile. Right?
Good morning, everyone. I would like to share briefly something about my own experience growing up. I was born in 1995. And as I might share in the 2000s, the early days of like broadband internet here in Brazil, and I think it's quite interesting, this experience of mine, because it goes directly into the subject that Donald is talking about. You see, as I had access to the internet, but nobody in my family actually knew anything about computers, and I had the computer myself, and I learned many things through the internet, including as I learned like English progressively, and as I could access more areas of the internet. As generally speaking, as knowing some English is like you can access lots of things in the internet. And also, as in Brazil, we have some sort of like piracy is not that hard to do and to understand. And at the same time, as I was understanding more English, and then more, I had access to more content. And it's really funny though, because as the internet progressed, like the velocity and the speed I had and access to data, at the beginning I was like, okay, I can get this amount of data per week, so I'm going to use, how can I say, it was like, okay, I like video games very much, and I was like, okay, I can download this game, and it takes the entire week to download the game, so I can play lots of games because I don't have the speed to access the game. So I was, okay, so I'm going to play only one game per week, for instance. But of course, I could download more games than I could play. But then the internet got very fast, progressively. And then there was a moment that I had, like, I could download everything I wanted. Even today, I can access any book I want, and I don't need to go to the library to get the book. Even academic books, there are many tools online today that can give you access to any kind of book you would like to. Even, for instance, like me and my friend here, we were talking about like cognitive science, and we found a book, a very like weird book, and then after like 2 hours searching the internet, I found the book, and okay, the book is here, but what we do about this? And then like problems like that, I think that the stoicism that he was mentioning are really useful to think about, because I got myself in a very serious crisis last year, because I see, okay, I thought knowledge in a way that doesn't really get me anywhere, because I am enrolled in a university course, but it doesn't solve any of my problems. It doesn't teach me anything that I want to know. And I think, how do I solve these questions? I mean, maybe it's even less about like having like a robot in class, because it's a different thing. I think that's more important here. It's about how we deal with information, about well-being actually. Because we as young people that have access to everything, I don't know, human beings are intelligent, they are autonomous. I think children are already doing it. I think things are really different than we can see in schools. We see children in schools because we tell them that they have to go there, but I think like maybe they're elsewhere. Every children I talk today, I do this exercise because I find this very stimulating. I get like children younger than me, my cousins and etc., and then ask them, okay, how do you use the internet? And I get very fascinating answers. They're one very different from the other. When I was young and I had like in the early days of the broadband internet, everybody was much like doing the same thing in the internet. They were like, okay, we have this instant messaging way to communicate. We all do this, but nowadays it's completely different. There is like a really wide world, and it's like it was really hard. I just get interested because I have no way to talk about this or even understand what is happening. But I see one children is doing this, the other is doing that. One already knows some of programming, the other knows something very different from that, and we see like all these problems in the world relating to knowledge, technology, and education. So I don't know. I just would like to share this brief experience with you.
Okay, I'll continue. Obrigado. Yeah. Just to summarize the first half of today's meeting, I introduced the term cyberology, although really I don't mind what we call it, but I think there is a subject to be addressed, namely the opportunities, the dangers, and the practicalities of a world saturated with new technologies, which this gentleman was just talking about in his earlier experience. We heard a comment from Joan Kogler concerning design and the issue of whether the machines that are developing so fast are actually suitably designed for, well, welfare, bem-estar, and for the cognitive profile of the people who are using them. There is, of course, an idea from science fiction, from the very wonderful film 2001, for example, that machines may take over. They may develop an autonomy, and they may even turn against us. Now, of course, all things are possible, but I think the more practical issue for us is not so much that they turn against us, but that we use them in a bad way. And of course, this can be due to commercial interests, it can be due to hidden interests, and it can be due just to laziness and the fact that it's perhaps more entertaining to play video games than it is to sit and think.
Mentioned that today you was going also to discuss something about IBM Watson real how it works, because I think that everything that is connected with technology means rules that you must learn, and then that's finished. And then you learn that. You learn this rule to do something, or you do something automatically. There is no way out. But the point is how to use real human experience to advance something. And I think this is being done in medicine, in Watson, and I have seen something, I have heard about a little, and from my what I got about the way it works, it's just the experience that doctors have had along their practice, and this has been put in data, and this is worked out statistically, and that's all. I mean, there is not at all anything that in artificial intelligence can do everything really new is something that a human has made, and then you put this in a machine. And that's how it is always. And so I would like to understand a bit better what you mentioned, but I didn't see anything about it until now. How is the architecture of the Watson machine so that we can get a feeling on how really it works?
Okay, everything black and white and all or nothing. I'm going to describe Watson now. So this is the second half of the talk, and I hope it will answer some of your questions. So I'll describe the architecture of Watson. Regarding what humans can do, let's see if we agree that Watson's not really doing anything we cannot do, but it can do more of it. That's the thing. And so we need to work with machines like Watson, because they're, well, an obvious one is memory, another is mental arithmetic. There are things that machines can do faster than we can do. There are things I would completely agree, things we can do that machines are not so good at. But let's see if it's your concern. There are a lot of slides here, and we won't be able to look at everything, but that's a list of some areas where Watson is being already applied. Now, something special about IBM is that they work with companies in industries, and that's not universal. This has been a practice of IBM's since long ago. And long ago, it was well known that you could buy a better machine for less money from other people. But the one reason why IBM have been popular is that they work with the industries they sell to. Now, there are negative things to say about Watson, and we can say them in a moment. I'll just show what it does first. Now, IBM like to say augmented intelligence instead of artificial intelligence. I think they simply mean that they want the machine to amplify what we can do. So they are concerned with what they call the cognitive era. There are other companies who use the expression cognitive era as well. But let me just move quickly. You can access the slides if you wish to. And here are a lot of links to areas where Watson is being used. Right. So let me just say from the beginning, the Watson system has 4 main components. And people sometimes say these are not original. They were not invented by IBM, and I think IBM don't disagree with this. They've just put 4 things together. So the first one is natural language processing, and that means you can talk to Watson, and it can talk back to you in several languages. This is not new technology. In fact, it's underexploited technology so far. I gave the example before of intelligent agents. Well, natural language processing could quite easily be built into our mobile phones so that I speak English and you speak Japanese, and it translates, especially if we would agree to use a restricted vocabulary. That sort of machine translation is quite possible, and IBM are doing it. Now, the second thing is pattern detection, often called big data analytics. So that means it can take in mass data from the Internet of Things, from various sources, and it can detect patterns in it. This began years ago, for example, in supermarkets, detecting patterns of buying certain things on a Friday evening, and they could find out information that's useful for selling more things. If you put certain chocolate beside the cash machine as customers are going out on a Friday evening, it will sell more. If you do it on Wednesday afternoon, it will sell less. This sort of thing. Now, the third one is the one I'm going to focus on. The third component of Watson is that it does probabilistic reasoning to work out what it thinks the best answer is to the question that it's asked. Now, IBM did a fantastic publicity stunt. There is a quiz program called Jeopardy in the United States, and their machine actually won against particularly successful humans. So that was really quite a big surprise. Also, of course, one of their machines won at chess against Kasparov, which was another publicity stunt. Now, quite what it means is maybe the interesting thing. So, yeah. Now, this is perhaps the most important slide here, and an answer to this lady's question. What you see there is called the candidate generation selection pipeline. And all that means is that Watson generates a big set of possible answers to a question, a big set of candidate answers. And it then does something called ranking and scoring. It orders them in sequence of probability, and then it gives you the one that it thinks is the most probable. Now, one interest in this, I think, is that we do the same thing. Humans do the same thing. Therefore, in terms of augmented intelligence, in terms of Joan Kogler's point about design, if a computer system is going to help us, we really need to know how the jigsaw fits together. What is it going to augment that we do already? Or perhaps what is it going to do which we cannot do at all? Or perhaps what is it going to do that we don't really need any help with? And also what is it not able to do? But it's a relationship with us. We have the capabilities we have because of evolution. Education tries to enhance some of this, but there always is the question, how does the jigsaw fit together? How is education helping our bit of the jigsaw? How is the machine helping our bit of the jigsaw that we were born with? So what you see here on the slide is simply the generation of a lot of candidate answers to a question. And then with the yellow arrow, they call it merging and ranking on this slide. It needs to pick out the one that it believes is the most probable.
Everything that is in these squares, I mean hypothesis and way to, I mean, one thing is data, other thing is meaning. I want to try to understand the meaning. And as I see, you have hypotheses and you have rule, everything that humans must make. Machine does not do this. So you just must, all the rules you must put, all the hypotheses you must put. I mean, I don't see anything of artificial intelligence in this system. Huh? It depends. It depends on how you made the computer work. That's the point. That's the point.
If I understand you rightly, you're saying that the computer is occupying the same categories which our thought occupies. Like you make hypotheses, I make hypotheses, the computer makes hypotheses. Yes, I mean, I agree, and I find this a very interesting point, because it's a correspondence between what the computer does and what we do. And if we want it to augment our intelligence, or the intelligence of a business, or a committee, or two people, or one person, then we need to know what it is augmenting. But the thing is that computers can do some things much faster than we can. I mean, that's so it's not a difference in type, it's a difference in degree, perhaps.
But coming to your point, if the machine can make hypotheses, that's my point. It depends on how many data has been put in that is compatible with a certain hypothesis. If, by definition, the good hypotheses are not being put in the system, chance is zero that the machine arrives to something. So if you have an intellectual bias and personal bias and emotional bias against certain hypotheses, you can do what you want. It will never come out from a machine.
I think that's a very interesting point. And yes, I mean, just as the machine can handle more data than we can, much more data. A moment, please. It can handle more data than we can. Therefore, if a bias, as you say, is put into the data, we may not notice. It's a problem with mass data that bias inserted into it can go undetected by us. But as you say, the information is in the data, but nowadays the data is coming partly from the Internet of Things. And, well, one example is railway informatics for railway safety, which I had some involvement with in China with my railway colleagues. It's just a fact of life nowadays, with more and more very fast trains, that safety is dependent in part on computer systems, which, like this one, can process information from the Internet of Things about weather, the state of the track, the state of the tunnels, and so on. It can process this very quickly, and it can process data from the past when a railway crash did occur, and it can process data which is hypothetical about crashes which might occur. But as you rightly say, that there's nothing happening which we cannot do, except that the machine can do much more of it. Yeah? It's not showing intelligence which we do not have. We can detect patterns. And sometimes it starts with a feeling, and then it becomes more explicit. But if you're concerned with railway safety, which is interesting because it's life critical, I mean, a lot of people will suffer if a train crashes, then this sort of system is becoming more or less essential. Not necessarily IBM Watson, but the big data analytic capacity to process a lot of crash-relevant data.
But in a sense, you just are back to the basic point of statistics. How to have a representative sample of what you are wanting. So the point is this. If you are making a question that only doctors can answer, then of course, your universe is of doctors. If you are wanting questions that only men usually answer, not women, you are never going to overpass the prejudice that holds all humanity concerning the role of woman and the role of man. Because you are going to put data on which you believe. And if you don't believe on the data that eventually you will be in the other direction, it's out of the system. And that's simply out of the system. And it will continue to be forever.
Okay, well, the issue of bias is clearly an important one. And Joanna is...
Excuse me, just do an observation about all this. We cannot elude us that computation is only concerned with data. It's also concerned with process. And it's truly in the agenda, research agenda, to better understand the human ways of doing things in order to propose new processes such that we can do better with data. Only beyond statistics, because statistics has that limitation of that, for instance, correlation is not causation. But if we combine statistics and logics, as have been done from about 20 or maybe 30 years by some researchers, it's possible to start to make some kind of causation inference. But we are combining statistics and logics because we are going beyond statistics, combining different experiments with different probability measures. So this means that we are understanding better the ways we do processes. So it's not just data, there are also processes.
Hello? Maybe I just add to Joan's point, which is that the EBIC conference, which I mentioned before, the Encontro Brasileiro Internacional de Ciências Cognitivas, has just taken place in Campinas. And we heard there that one concern which many people present had is the difference between correlation and causation in the realm of big data analytics. So the theme of the conference was ethics and big data, and many topics were discussed in that area. But one that was recognized was the one just mentioned, that causation may be one thing, and correlation is another thing. Now, historically, David Hume discussed this in the inquiry concerning human nature, and the treatise on human understanding, if I remember the title. But he pointed out that correlation is not the same thing as causation, and stated a problem before big data analytics came on the scene. But anyway, my concern here is just to introduce this aspect of IBM Watson. It involves probabilistic reasoning, and it's something which we can do, although without the power of the machine. It's interesting also that in psychiatry and the syndrome of autism, there is sometimes observed to be malfunction of the second half of this process. So the person can generate possibilities, but they may not be so good at picking out the most likely one. In case it's of interest, there's a well-known experiment done by Francesca Happy at UCL London, using what are called homographs. Now that means that you have one word written, but it has two meanings or more, and those meanings may be pronounced differently. And so what happens optimally is we see the word, we detect more than one possible meaning, and we pick the probable one. And we pick it on the basis of context, which is an important issue. The experiment, for example, used the word tear, which can be tear, like tear, or can be a tear, like crying. And I think the sentence was something like, she had a tear, tear, on her dress or on her shoulder. Now, this could mean a break in the cloth. It could mean a tear. And the finding was that people who independently had the diagnosis of autism were less good at this. And a related experiment concerned figure and ground. So you have a little figure, and it has something surrounding it in a drawing, and it was found that to pass the test, you need to distinguish the two. You need to separate the figure from the ground, and people with an independent diagnosis of autism were actually better at this than average. So distinguishing figure from ground can be difficult for everybody, but they found it to be easier. Now, if you take the ground to be a context, then the people with that diagnosis were actually better at ignoring context. So it's a two-sided coin, perhaps. But anyway, here, Watson needs to generate many possibilities, and it then needs to do what's called scoring and ranking. So that's a slide on scoring and ranking. Simply the process of attaching probabilities to the different candidate answers that have been generated. So I can talk more about Watson if you like. It's used in several industries already. When you phone the bank, you might be talking to it, or you might be talking to something similar. Software robotics is advancing fast, and we're looking at a time when we telephone companies, and we do not get to speak to a human being unless we're lucky. Right? But maybe I should stop talking now. I can say more about Watson if you like, but I think we should take people's questions about the opportunities, the risks, and the practicalities of these new technologies.
Perhaps I say something connected with the last comment. Yeah, something connected with the last comment, that with statistics plus logic, we solve the problem. Of course, there are many problems that we can solve with statistics plus logic. But you cannot imagine that you can solve all problems with statistics and logic. Because we are humans, and humans do not follow logic. That's the basic point. Humans have motivations that have very little to do with logic. That's the basic point. Humans like to make games. Games. So you see all these young people crazy about computing, not because of the computing rules, because of the games. So if you are asking only very objective questions, probably using statistics and logics, you are going to have good answers. But if you are dealing with human motivation and human behavior and human characteristics. If you get only statistics and logics, you get nowhere. So that's the point that must be realized. I mean, it's fantastic what technology can do, but it is a complete illusion to imagine that it's going to solve our problem. It will not.
I think there's probably nobody in the room who would disagree with you. Of course, machines are not magical, but I think the world has changed because machines have changed. Now, hold on, please. And life has changed, and work has changed. You know, and of course we can say there is nothing new under the sun. Of course we can. And it's true. These things are not completely new. And we had machines to help us years ago. But change is change. And we will not, our children will not be living in the same world. Which we, please,
but that's the point. The children will learn everything without necessary to have any rational rule. You see a baby takes a cellular which I cannot use until now and will not use because I hate it, and the baby just and it's finished. And that's the point. You don't need to teach the new generation. They will absorb automatically.
Here's an example that's not automatic. The slide there is IBM Watson in oil and gas. Now, they're not alone at all. In fact, informatics and big data informatics have been in oil and gas for years, even to the extent that they have what they call a legacy problem, meaning that old systems are difficult to integrate with new systems. You know, they've had a sort of underwater Internet of Things, IoT, for years. Now, they think this is highly relevant to oil and gas discovery and also to safety. Yeah, but I'm just making the point that it was not automatic. It was not something that just happens to children. Although, as you rightly say, many, many things are automatic, like learning our first language, like learning Portuguese or English. But this was not automatic. This is held to be crucial for oil discovery and therefore to the economy of a country like Brazil. And it's also held to be essential to safety. So that's just an obvious example where machines are useful. Yeah. Yes, they're wonderful and they're dangerous. Would you agree? Yeah, we agree then. They're both wonderful and dangerous. Yeah, I agree. Yeah.
Hi, Don. Sorry, I was not here in the first part of your talk. But my question is a little bit different, not trying to understand if machines are likely humans. But my question is about what kind of new risks or new problems that machine could bring to us. For example, my question is related with the trying of the automobile industry that's trying to make the autonomous cars. My question is, when you make some kind of program trying to prevent risks and accidents, sometimes we are involved because it's the nature of the risks with dilemmas. Like, for example, the classical problem of the trains. You have a crash, and the driver of the train see the problems in, for example, some meters before, and they have two choices. They just follow and they make the train crash and maybe kill many peoples, and they have the possibility to take a deviation, but kill or hit his own house. It's a classical problem about the decision making. If you decided, how was the patterns, how was the criteria that we could put in a system, autonomous system, to the computer or to the machine decide what's better? I think there is a movie also with the same kind of dilemma. It was Me, Robot. I think it's based on a romance. And all the problem with the principal actor, the character, was about a decision that a robot make and not in saving someone else and saving him. It means this is a classical situation that is not only about logic, it's about beliefs and ethical values. What do you think about this? I think this is a scenario that is not so far from today.
Thank you for making an excellent point. One response I would give is that there's a difference between open bias and hidden bias. And this applies with computers, also without computers. But if a bias is coded into a system without being explicit, then of course we are affected by the bias of the person who made the system or who wrote the code, etc. And it's very easy to do this. It's very easy to put bias into data. It's easy to put bias into a system without admitting it. And as this lady says, people play games, people have prejudices, and these also can be put in. I would only point out regarding computers and the technologies we're talking about, that the phenomenon is not new. As soon as you have a mediator, something between the world and us, there is the possibility of bias. So I think people in communications would agree that journalists have always done this. Journalists have political agendas, which we might agree with or disagree with, but they would tend generally not to state this as a prejudice, but it gets built into what they write. Another point concerns the Christian Bible. There was a time before Martin Luther when you needed a priest to read it and interpret it for you. So in the good case, that would be very helpful because the priest knows you and knows what sections of the Bible might be relevant. But again, it gives the possibility of bias. So I would suggest that bias belongs to situations where there's a mediator between us and the world, and bias can be helpful, bias can be unhelpful, and I don't think it's peculiar to computers. What I find really scary, though, is that in the days of mass data, we become dependent on computers to detect patterns in the mass data. So if there is bias somewhere along the road, in the computer system or in the collection of the data, then we don't have the time or the ability to detect it. So I would say there's always been bias because people do play games and people have motives that are perhaps undeclared. And we now have, in the second digital era, as people call it, the possibility again for bias. A risk.
Hi, Don. Thank you for your great talk that also has provoked a lot of thinking. But I'd like to add another issue, just to perhaps to make things even more complex, is that humans not only are capable of being biased and prejudiced, we do have more than or less than a consciousness. We process in our lives an extremely huge amount of information, even on an actual basis. That right now I'm processing lots of information that I simply do not use, and some of them I internalize, but are not part of my consciousness. We do have something that is underground, and we need to have that sphere of being that in several ways emerge as many times a symptomatic way. So we do have a mental life that is not open, it's not transparent. And this puts into the equation a whole level of not understanding. It's things that are not meaningful. They are, but also they do exist in terms of structuring and organizing the way that we think and the way that we behave. And even if we discuss that, can artificial intelligence produce a kind of artificial consciousness? The question just beyond this is possible to have beyond consciousness and unconscious and artificial unconscious?
Thank you for your question. I have to think a lot to give a good answer. You're asking if there can be a machine unconscious as well as a machine consciousness. I mean, one point I could make is that there has been a worry for a long time about what people call positivism, and some people call it logocentricity. I mean, machines or no machines, but focusing on the rational, the explicit, and so on. You see it in cognitive science in what's called rules and representations. It's in a way an easy way out. If humans can do something, then the temptation in cognitive science is to try to write down the rules and the facts that they use to do it. But in fact, as this lady says, people have motivation, which may not always be explicitly stated. People play games as well. People have an unconscious. I am reminded of the work of Max Weber in sociology, and he talked about Verstehen. Now, his point was that if you're going to understand a different culture, for example, you need to be able to step into their shoes. You need to be able to think like them, and this, he thought, is not the same thing as having a list of facts and rules which you could feed to a computer. So he also was referring to a dimension of human understanding which is not easily reducible to rules and facts, and therefore cannot easily be processed by that sort of computer program. Now, there is an answer in cognitive science, which is to say, oh, what about neural nets? Because a neural net detects patterns, it learns patterns, and it can become very effective at distinguishing pictures of horses from pictures of donkeys, even. It goes through a training process, but the interesting thing there is that there is nothing explicit in the program. We say in my country it's just porridge, right? Now porridge is oats just mixed up in hot water. There are no facts and no rules explicitly in the trained neural net, or so the argument goes. The trouble there, of course, is even if the neural net is presenting a computational version of a second dimension of thinking, namely the unconscious, the trouble is that it's effective without being explicit, because it cannot tell us what it's thinking or how. But in general, personally speaking, I agree with this. I'm not a positivist. I think machines are there to be useful. I don't think that they easily encompass everything that we can do. But of course, this is an old question. The Dreyfus brothers in America wrote many decades ago about things which computers cannot do. And actually, their focus was on expertise. They thought that with time and experience, a person becomes an expert in something in a way that's difficult to write down. And it's difficult to teach. And that takes us right back to the ancient Greeks. Aristotle, in his treatment of phronesis, which I mentioned near the beginning, said that it requires experience and it's difficult to teach. And so, for example, when we're learning a profession, it's very helpful for the student to keep the company of an older person who has experience in that profession. But, of course, the older person might prefer just to write down the rules that they've learned, and it's strangely difficult to do this. And Plato also raises the issue in his treatment of anamnesis in the Meno dialogue. Namely, he asks the question, can it be taught? And there is a bit of a mystery here, and it's a mystery for us in education, why it is that, of course, we can teach rules and representations. We can teach what's positive, what's explicit, what's friendly to positivistic thinking. But this dimension of the unconscious, which is so important, and it's important in many fields like political persuasion, it is more mysterious. And the positivist answer would be, oh, well, Donald, it's all really rules and representations. It's just they happen to be under the water or under the ground. Now, sometimes that is true, but I don't believe it's always true. And just going back to Weber, I think he was describing something which perhaps machines cannot do, which is the Verstehen achievement of thinking from the other person's point of view.
I have still one point different from what has been discussed, but it has to do with language and meaning. I have been reading a lot about the so-called semantic semantic hub. And I know that I know something about it for humans. And would you have something to say about it from what you know about everything you know?
To try to answer, but this expression, the semantic hub, what does it mean?
Yeah, it is, the basic point is how the human mind gives meaning to words. Because that's the basic thing that makes our species different from everything else. We give meaning to words. It is partially arbitrary, but it has had some origin far back in the past. And so a lot of research is being doing in this point. How to understand the way the mind gives meaning to words. And they came to this idea of the semantic hub. I pronounce the H hub. Yeah.
We keep hearing about discoveries that animals have a small language capacity, but it is very small compared to our capacity, as you rightly say, because we have grammar, for example, and we can construct an infinity of sentences. As for the question meaning, I should not pretend to be a linguist because I'm not. I don't really know that area. This gentleman.
Transmitting. Okay, sorry. So I think you can try to answer a question. I mean, you're asking how exactly we can account for meaning, say the attribution of meaning and interpretation by human beings, right? How do human beings interpret words, right? That's right. Exactly. So, mhm, yes. Yeah, so that really depends on which semantic theory you ask. So if you go to generative semanticists, a generative linguist like Chomsky, he'll give you a different answer than if you go to a cognitive linguist like George Lakoff. So, and I think the second type of answer is actually more interesting because in cognitive linguistics, it's a subfield of linguistics where you highlight really the importance of the human body in the process of attributing meaning to words. So that's say a gap that we still have in I believe in natural language processing by computers in the way we have today and the way we actually biologically interpret sentences and words and meaning in general. According to this trend of research, the fact that we have bodies and that we are situated in contexts which are not completely arbitrary. There are, I mean, as I said, we have motivations to say things, we have context, and all that sort of meta linguistics, so to speak, context or content, according to this trend of research, depends really on this embodied nature of the human mind. I'm not sure I'm being clear, but in the case of robots or artificial intelligence, it's usually absent because we try and abstract everything away and stick only to what we believe would be the essential element, which is like say the lexical component or the syntactic component, and leaving semantics to arise from that.
Okay, thank you very much for the contribution. I'm afraid we need to stop now, and I need to hand over to my host, Professor Saraiva.
Yeah, just to say thank you again, John, and to all of you who are here attending the second seminar, and ask you to be aware that there will be other ones. If you have not signed the list, please do, so we can send you messages informing you about the next ones, probably in 2 weeks' time or 3 weeks. This is basically the interval that we have used. Not always in the same day, so it depends on. We don't want to choose always the same day and time, because otherwise someone who cannot attend that day will always fail to attend, so we're kind of moving around the week. Okay, so please check your email address boxes and come to the next one. Thank you all. Thank you, Don, and see you soon.